Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki Sharma, Upadhyay. Let's get started.
A disastrous step.
How much do you know about Ukraine? It's famous for its beautiful landscapes, its culture that spans thousands of years, and a deadly nuclear disaster in Chernobyl. Ukraine is the second largest country in Eastern Europe. It was once the breadbasket of Europe. Today, it is a test for Europe. Ukraine says it could be invaded by Russia any moment. Its military has advanced since the annexation of Crimea a few years back, but it's still no match for Moscow. Russian troops are showing off their firepower at the border. American and British diplomats are being pulled out of Ukraine. The West is promising support, even deploying weapons, but stopping short of a promise to get their hands dirty should there be a war. The stakes, you see, are too high, and Europe is a house divided. What does it mean for Ukraine, also for Russia, which may not really want a war if the threat of war will suffice? On Gravitas tonight, we'll break down the conflict that has all the elements to erupt into a full-blown war. Also on the show tonight, Boris Johnson's parties are killing his career. The latest row is over his birthday bash. UK police have launched an investigation. Is Vladimir Putin going to Pakistan? What is Moscow's relationship with Islamabad, and how should New Delhi see this? Soldiers in Burkina Faso announce a military takeover on state television. We'll bring you the full story. And we are in the middle of a global learning crisis. School closures have disrupted the lives of over 31 million students. We'll discuss. We begin, as always, with Gravitas Global Headlines.
COVID-19 cases in India continue to decline after reporting more than 300,000 COVID-19 cases for 5 consecutive days. The daily COVID count drops to a little over 255,000, 16% lower than the day before. The daily positivity rate has dropped to 15.5% from 20.75%. North Korea fired 2 cruise missiles into the sea off its east coast, says South Korea's military. All this amid rising tensions over a series of weapons tests. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has vowed to bolster the military, warning he could lift a moratorium on testing atomic bombs. In a possible turning point in efforts to salvage the 2015 nuclear accord, Iran, for the first time, says that it is ready to consider direct talks with the United States if it can get a good deal with guarantees. This after the US reaffirmed it is prepared to hold direct talks with Iran over its nuclear program. Millions of people were left without power after a massive blackout hits 3 Central Asian nations, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan. After a major power line in Kazakhstan was disconnected, Uzbekistan suspends electricity exports to Afghanistan amid the power disruption in the country. Kurdish-led forces say they raided part of a prison seized by Islamic State fighters in northeastern Syria and forced at least 300 militants to surrender. This after the United Nations Children's Agency called for the evacuation of nearly 850 children held in the complex with militants and other families, saying their safety was at risk. The Istanbul airport, which was Europe's busiest last year, suspends all flights following a heavy snowstorm that has blanketed Turkey's biggest city. Meanwhile, rare snow also paralyzed most parts of Greece, leading to school closures, shutting down vaccination centers, and even the parliament in Athens. Some 23 cases of COVID-19 have been recorded among the crew of an Australian ship carrying aid to disaster-hit Tonga. This as Tonga tries desperately to avoid a COVID outbreak on its soil as more humanitarian aid arrives in the Pacific region. The world's most powerful telescope has arrived at its cosmic parking spot a million miles away from Earth, says NASA. The James Webb Telescope has the potential to unravel mysteries of the universe and peek back further into time than ever before. Rafael Nadal is just 2 wins away from a record-breaking 21st Grand Slam title after a 5-set win over Denis Shapovalov at the Australian Open. Nadal survived a tough test against the 14th seed and will now face world number 7 Matteo Berrettini in the semi-finals. Women's world number 1 Ashley Barty will battle Madison Keys for a place in the title clash after the American upset reigning French Open champion Barbara Krejcikova. 2019 Tour de France winner Egan Bernal is in intensive care after undergoing surgery on his spine following a serious crash suffered while training in his native Colombia. The 25-year-old underwent multiple rounds of surgery, with doctors working to repair fractures in his right leg and kneecap, as well as a collapsed lung. Doctors have said that the neurosurgery has ended successfully.
Vladimir Putin is proving to be an enigma for the West. 106 days ago, Russian troops lined up on the border with Ukraine. 3 months and 2 weeks later, the West still cannot figure out what they're up to. So they're doing what they know best, prepare for war. The US has put thousands of troops on standby. NATO has already deployed soldiers with advanced weapons. This is not a standoff anymore. This is a conflict. No side is ready to de-escalate. Both sides are drawing up battle plans. The United States has put 8,500 troops on standby. They can be dispatched to Europe at a moment's notice.
The Secretary of Defense ordered a number of U.S. troops. It's going to be up to 8,500 U.S. forces to be on a heightened alert and be prepared to deploy to Europe if needed and if warranted by NATO. Most of those troops would deploy as part of NATO's response force.
NATO already has boots on the ground, 4,000 troops deployed in Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia and Poland. They're split in multinational battalions and armed with tanks, air defenses, intelligence and surveillance units. Ukraine too is expanding its reserve force. Civilians from all walks of life are joining, some as young as 21. They're being trained in basic combat, but it's going to be very tough to match Moscow. Russian troops have been firing shots and conducting drills. Ukraine says Russian mortars have been flying into their territory.
We haven't been shooting for about 3 days. 3 days was the last time. All of a sudden, they opened up with grenade launchers and firearm. One mortar flew over and fell in the field behind us. 2 more hit between ours and the next position. In the next 15 minutes, everything was quiet again. Why? What for? Nobody knows. And that's how it is around here.
NATO, meanwhile, is reinforcing Eastern Europe with more ships and fighter jets.
We are considering to further enhance our presence in the eastern part of the alliance. This could include the deployment of additional NATO battle groups. Let me be clear, NATO will not compromise on core principles. We stand for the right of each nation to choose its own alliances, and NATO's door remains open.
No compromise is the message from NATO. How is Russia responding? With more troops. Russia has sent its Pacific Fleet forces to Belarus. Belarus shares a border with Ukraine. Earlier this month, Russian forces began deploying there. Russia and Belarus are stepping up their military engagements. They will hold joint military drills next month. The West sees Belarus as a staging ground for Russia now. If Moscow wants, it can target Kiev directly from Belarus. The US says Russia wants to turn this country into a permanent military base and deploy nuclear weapons along with soldiers. Russia, of course, rubbishes this. It has accused Washington of ratcheting up tensions.
The situation doesn't affect talks. The talks are completed at the current stage. Before we understand how and when we will continue NATO talks, we need to receive this notorious text. We hope that this will happen this week. And on what is going on from the US's side, either informationally or de facto, the rising tension. We talked yesterday about it a lot. Nothing changes. We are watching these actions of the USA with great concern.
The whole world, in fact, is watching the actions of the USA. President Biden met a number of European leaders virtually yesterday, but he said little about the outcome of the meeting.
I had a very, very, very good meeting, total unanimity with all the European leaders. We'll talk about it later. Thank you.
Total unanimity may be a bit of a tall claim. Europe is evidently divided. The US and the UK are warning about an impending conflict, but their friends in Europe are still not sure. Britain believes Russia could launch what they're calling a lightning war.
The intelligence is very clear that there are 60 Russian battle groups, about 60 Russian battle groups on the borders of Ukraine. The plan for a lightning war that could take out Kiev is one that everybody can see.
Johnson says Russia could take out Kiev, but Russia could win this without firing a single bullet. Ukraine is no match for it, and Ukraine's allies can't seem to agree on how to proceed. Wars, you see, are not won by weapons alone. You need commitment and conviction, and Europe is showing neither. Mark Twain once said, God created war so that Americans would learn geography. Prophetic words. Americans did learn some geography through wars in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Libya. The question is, do they want a lesson on Ukraine? I'm not talking about military assistance or deploying soldiers to Eastern Europe. That's deterrence. I'm talking about fighting a war. Will US soldiers get down in the trenches? Will America fight Russia? It's a complicated question. Washington has just wrapped up a failed military campaign in Afghanistan. Does Joe Biden have the appetite to start another one? And if he does, will his allies back him? Here's what the president said last month, and I'm quoting. The idea that the US will unilaterally use force to confront Russia invading Ukraine is not on the cards right now. We have a moral obligation and a legal obligation to our NATO allies under Article 5. That obligation does not extend to Ukraine. Well, technically he's right. Ukraine is not a NATO member yet, so America is not legally bound to fight Russia. They can try deterrence, they can train and arm Ukraine, but they don't really have to wage a war themselves. Having said that, we are talking about a superpower, and superpowers do not run away from a fight. If they do, they won't hear the end of it. Case in point, the withdrawal from Afghanistan. So this is not just a military question for America, it's a question of prestige. After a string of foreign disasters, Joe Biden needs a win. And to do that, he needs his allies together. He needs the NATO to back him. Unfortunately, that is not the case. Last week, Britain dispatched military aid to Ukraine, some anti-armor defensive weapons. I'll show you a map that shows the flight path of that delivery. They flew over Denmark and Poland into Ukraine. Why? To avoid German airspace. You can see the detour clearly. And this is not an isolated incident. Last month, Germany refused to send weapons to Ukraine. They also blocked the export of German-made NATO weapons. Clearly, Berlin is not 100% committed. And there are two reasons for that. Number one, Germany's dependence on Russian energy. And number two, their post-World War position against militarization. France has a different objection. President Emmanuel Macron sees this crisis as an opportunity, a chance to build his European army. This is what he told the European Parliament last week, and I'm quoting again. It's good that Europeans and the United States coordinate, but it's necessary that Europeans conduct their own dialogue. We must put together a joint proposal, a joint vision, a new security and stability order for Europe. This is what Emmanuel Macron said. America does not feature in this new order. The folks in Russia were quick to notice that. Here's what the Moscow Times said about Macron's statements. France calls for EU-Russia security pact in break with US. So Europe's big two are not convinced, France and Germany. And without their support, Joe Biden's position is much weaker. A, it would be a political disaster, probably strain their transatlantic ties forever. And B, because he needs European logistics. You have to remember the geography. The US is almost 6,000 miles away from Ukraine. Their troops need European bases and support. So fighting alone is not an option, not even for superpower America. Unless NATO is united, Biden will not wage a war. And don't forget the elephant in the room, nuclear weapons. Russia has around 6,400 nuclear warheads lying around. A direct confrontation between the world's biggest nuclear powers is apocalypse light. Neither Putin nor Biden wants that. So America is still betting on sanctions. Nothing new for Vladimir Putin. His country has been sanctioned multiple times by the West. Each time he finds a new market like Venezuela, Iran, and now China. So sanctions alone will not discourage Vladimir Putin, and this stalemate actually works in Russia's favor. Think about it. America does not want war. Moscow does not care about Western sanctions. So what's stopping Putin from marching into Kiev? Two things. Number one, mass casualties. Ukraine may not be able to defeat Russia, but it can give them a bloody nose. So invasion will come at a steep cost. And reason number two, invading is one thing, controlling is another. Let's assume Putin marches into Kiev. Let's assume that he installs a puppet regime. What happens next? He's controlling a country that despises Russian control. So rest assured, there will be an insurgency. And who will support that insurgency? The West. We've seen it happen before. Soviet-backed insurgents dismantled America in Vietnam. In response, American-backed Mujahideen dismantled the Soviets in Afghanistan. This chain of proxy wars is not new, and Putin knows all of this. So essentially, we are looking at a lose-lose situation. War, invasion, all of it ends with deaths and losses. The public may cheer the saber rattling, but they won't cheer sending their children to the trenches. And I know what you're thinking. How long can this standoff continue? Surely something has to give. Well, logically, yes. Russia and America may reach some sort of compromise, but it's not a guarantee. We often forget that we had 40 plus years of Cold War, the same standoffs, same proxy wars, same failed talks. So the threat of war may keep rising, but along with it, the cost of war also rises. And that is the deterrent on both sides, the cost of war. You heard about Twain. Let's now introduce you to a character from Fitzgerald. Meet the new Gatsby, Boris Johnson, currently moonlighting as the British Prime Minister. Johnson's parties have become the talk of the town. They have DJs, loud music, buffet dinners, wine and cheese, drinking till dawn, party props, and absolutely no rules. Like Gatsby, Johnson sometimes attends these parties, sometimes he skips. On the 19th of June 2020, Johnson was the life of his party. The British Prime Minister cut a cake as 30-odd men and women surrounded him and sang happy birthday. None of these 30 guests were supposed to be there. The UK, you see, was in the middle of its first lockdown. There was a ban on social mixing. Indoor gatherings were outlawed. No more than 2 people were allowed to meet indoors. But here was a party of 30 people at number 10 Downing Street. Boris Johnson was turning 56. And that was not the only occasion on which he partied during this pandemic. There was a cheese and wine party on the 15th of May 2020. It was at the Tendy Garden. Boris Johnson was there, as was his wife, Carrie, and 17 other people. Again, none of the 17 were legally allowed to be in attendance. On the 20th of May 2020, there was the famous BYOB, Bring Your Own Booze. Most of you know about it by now. At least 100 people attended the party, all illegally. There was a Downing Street flat party on the 13th of November 2020. There were impromptu drinks on the 25th of November 2020, parties on the 27th of November 2020, 10th of December the same year, 11th of December. The Tendy got a new wine fridge. On the 14th of December 2020, the Tory headquarters had a Christmas party. Everyone else in the UK cancelled Christmas parties and plans. They were spending the holidays alone because there was a ban on social gathering, but it did not apply to the Tories. They had a grand buffet. On the 15th of December, Boris and company had a Christmas quiz at Tendy. The staff wore tinsel and Santa hats. For everyone else in the UK, social gathering was still banned. There were parties on the 16th of December, 17th of December, 18th of December, and 16th of April 2021. That day, the staff drank till dawn. The same day, Prince Philip was laid to rest. Now, for those of you who have not been following the party saga, here's a quick recap. The British Prime Minister first denied attending any party. Johnson said he did not realize the BYOB party was a party. Apparently, he mistook it for a work event. 1 week later, Boris Johnson said that he was not aware that the social gathering was against COVID rules. He's the Prime Minister. And now he's caught with a birthday cake. What's next? Should you expect more skeletons tumbling out of this building? Even Boris Johnson is not sure. Listen to this conversation.
Can you guarantee that no more embarrassing allegations about alleged breaches of lockdown within Downing Street will come out before that report is published?
What I can guarantee is that this government is focused 100% on dealing with the big problems that we have.
It looks like the British press has had enough. A morning headline read, "You can't have your birthday cake and eat it, Boris." Another reminded its readers that Bojo had big birthday bash while the rest of us were all in lockdown. Here's what a third one declared. Johnson's problems grow with birthday party leak, and rightly so. It looks like someone finally called the police on the party animals. The Scotland Yard has stepped in. It will now be investigating all the parties at number 10 Downing Street through the pandemic.
My officers have assessed several other events that appear to have taken place at Downing Street and Whitehall. On the available information.
Embarrassing, to say the least. When was the last time you heard police investigating parties hosted by a Prime Minister? Boris Johnson says he will cooperate with the police. Earlier this evening, he addressed the British Parliament. Here's what he said.
So I welcome the Met's decision to conduct its own investigation, because I believe this will help to give the public the clarity it needs and help to draw a line under matters. But I want to reassure the House, Mr. Speaker, and the country that I and the whole government are focused 100% on dealing with the people's priorities, including the UK's leading role in protecting freedom around the world.
The opposition is having a field day. They're playing all possible cards, emotional, moral, legal, and written on all of them is the word resign.
The Prime Minister is a national distraction. He's got to go.
Honestly, Boris Johnson may soon be left with no choice. Pandemic parties are killing his political career. Many Tory MPs have already written letters of no confidence. Many have publicly called for his resignation. Some MPs are reportedly being blackmailed into supporting Boris Johnson's government. But for how long? Soon the much-awaited investigation by civil servant Sue Gray will be out. A critical report could push the remaining MPs over the edge. And going by the circumstantial evidence, the report won't really be a cakewalk for the Prime Minister. The birthday party has taken the cake. And all in all, it's a grim scenario for Boris Johnson. He survived the mishandling of the pandemic, but he may not survive the hangover of these parties. Let's talk about China now. Chinese celebrities are now facing the wrath of the state. Ahead of the Lunar New Year festivities, Beijing has kicked off a clean-up drive. China says it wants to, quote-unquote, purify the internet by taking down celebrity fan groups, banning child influencers. Why is the state targeting celebrities? Our next report has some answers.
China has a new enemy. It is not a country, neither corrupt officials nor dissenters. China's latest enemy is anyone who's famous. So Beijing's censors are going after celebrity fan groups, child influencers, and lavish lifestyles on the internet. China is cleaning up the virtual world. making the internet a healthier place, ostensibly for minors. The real motive is the culling of content on the internet. Part of a wider crackdown on China's entertainment industry. What's driving this crackdown? Xi Jinping's mission to reshape Chinese culture. He wants to discourage materialism, reduce Western influence, and promote more nationalistic values. Celebrities are at the center of this effort. They are under pressure to represent and promote the values of the Communist Party. There are tough penalties for non-compliance. Makers of television shows have been given new mandates. In the credit rolls of their shows, they must broadcast the names and nationalities of the celebrities they cast. Those who have given up Chinese citizenship must be named and shamed. The Communist Party has created a blacklist of celebrities. Disgraced public figures are banned on television and social media. Chinese regulators have warned broadcasters these banned stars should get no platform, no live events during the Lunar New Year. Both on television and the internet, children have not been spared. Minor celebrities and influencers will also face these curbs. And denied internet platforms. Their live streams will be wiped out. Even Hollywood can't escape China's Lunar New Year cleanup. Ahead of the festive season, cult classic film The Fight Club has released in China, but with an alternative ending. In the original movie, the protagonist prevails against the establishment, but in the Chinese version, it's the cops who win. The movie's climax has been removed and replaced with this message. It says the anti-establishment protagonist was arrested and the plan to spark a social revolution fails. Chinese censors are known to be ruthless, but this Lunar New Year they're taking censorship to another extreme. Bureau Report, World is One.
A lot has happened in the last 2 years, the pandemic years. Many variants came and went, many leaders were voted out, new vaccines and treatments emerged, but one thing is still unchanged. This man, Dr. Tedros, soon to be re-elected as the chief of the World Health Organization. Today was nomination day. The WHO's Executive Council held a secret vote. Spoiler alert, Tedros won. Not surprising, since he was the only candidate running. The actual election will be held in the month of May. It promises to be another stunt. It's not a question of if he will win, it's a question of how many extra votes he will get. Frankly, we should all be jealous of Dr. Tedros. He messed up royally for 2 full years. 5.6 million people died on his watch. And what penalty does he get? Nothing. The world is offering him 1 more term. Most people are not so lucky, but then again, most people are not on China's payroll. We keep saying that the pandemic caught us off guard. Well, that's true for normal people, you and me. Not for the WHO. Their entire job is to prepare for such worst-case scenarios. But Dr. Tedros did not. He kept downplaying the crisis. He kept siding with China. And during all of this, we lost valuable time. By the time Dr. Tedros woke up, it was too late. The virus had already spread everywhere. Cut to 2022. You would think he's learned something. Maybe perfected his messaging at least, or stayed away from politics. Well, think again. The world may have changed, but Dr. Tedros is the same old confused man.
But it's dangerous to assume that Omicron will be the last variant or that we are in the end game. On the contrary, globally, the conditions are ideal for more variants to emerge.
It's plausible that the region is moving towards a kind of a pandemic endgame, not an endgame of the COVID-19, but a pandemic endgame.
Not in the endgame, moving towards an endgame. Which one is it, Dr. Tedros? A few minutes back, we told you about the lockdown parties in Britain. You saw the kind of pressure that Boris Johnson is under. That's called accountability. If you fail, you get pulled up. But Dr. Tedros hails from a different category. His failures are rewarded, not punished, all thanks to his godfather in Beijing. Let me take you back to January 2020. Tedros met with Chinese President Xi Jinping, and this is what he said after the meeting. I'm quoting from Dr. Tedros. China's cooperation and transparency is very, very commendable, and we really appreciate it. In fact, he also said that I was very encouraged and impressed by Xi Jinping's detailed knowledge of the outbreak and his personal involvement in the response. This was for me a very rare leadership. I will praise China again and again because its actions actually help in reducing the spread of coronavirus to other countries. That's less of a comment and more of a love letter to Xi Jinping. Personally involved, he says. That's how Dr. Tedros described the Chinese president. Maybe involved in the cover-up, but certainly not in containing the pandemic. Here's another comment Dr. Tedros made in the same month, January 2020, the one that I just read out. China's cooperation and transparency is very, very commendable, he said, and we really appreciate it. This comment came 3 weeks after China arrested 8 whistleblowers in Wuhan. So much for transparency. The fact is, Dr. Tedros kept siding with China. He ignored the evidence, he ignored the experts, and he kept believing what the Chinese fed him. Why did he do that? Some say he owes his position to the Chinese, that China got him elected as the World Health Organization chief. Now, 5 years later, they're doing it again. Not a single candidate has emerged to challenge Dr. Tedros. All the talk about fixing the World Health Organization, all the talk about preparing better. But when it came to doing something, the world failed again. America has no candidate. Europe has no candidate. South Asia has no candidate. They have cleared the way for a second term. Frankly, I'm surprised there was no bonus. What the WHO needs is a top-to-bottom rejig. Leadership, protocols, funding, voting, everything needs to be revamped. And to do that, you need a fearless and independent chief. And Dr. Tedros is not that person. I get that firing the WHO chief in the middle of a pandemic is scary. But the flip side is even worse. You will see more mixed messaging, more blind support for China. This election was a golden chance to fix all of that, to rescue the World Health Organization. Instead, we'll have more of Dr. Disaster. So no changes at the WHO, but elsewhere some big geopolitical changes are afoot. 2 Cold War rivals could be burying their past, Russia and Pakistan. Historically, there's been very little to talk about. Until 1991, they were in opposing camps. America supported Pakistan and the Soviet Union was closer to India. We all know that. In the last 3 decades, not very much has changed. No big trade deals, no weapons purchases. That Cold War distance never really disappeared. But this year, things could change. Reports say Vladimir Putin could visit Pakistan in 2022. Why is this important? A, because Putin has never visited Pakistan, and that's saying something. 20 years of leadership, 0 visits to Pakistan. In fact, no Russian leader or Soviet leader has ever visited Pakistan. That's a record of sorts. And B, it could signal a realignment in South Asia, a new China-Pakistan-Russia partnership. Now, first, the logistics. We still don't have a date for Putin's visit. All we know is that diplomats in Moscow and Islamabad are talking about it. And right now, it's still 50-50. Pakistan, you see, has been trying to make this happen for many years. But the Russians don't want to visit just for the sake of it. They want something symbolic, maybe a big-ticket project or a big arms deal. And this time, they do have one such project, the Pakistan Stream gas pipeline. It runs from Karachi in Sindh to Kasur in Punjab. That's around 1,120 kilometers. The deal is worth more than $2 billion. Russia and Pakistan signed it in 2015, but construction never began, thanks to the threat of American sanctions. Now it seems Pakistan does not care. They want Vladimir Putin to inaugurate the groundbreaking of this pipeline. What explains this newfound romance? Well, we can think of 3 reasons. Reason number 1, the changing political equations. Pakistan and America are not allies anymore. Washington is still reeling from their betrayal in Afghanistan. And the way things are going, a compromise seems unlikely. So Pakistan is looking at new options. And who better than Russia, a big Eurasian power, a close friend of their iron brother China, and a reputed weapons merchant to boot? Russia is thinking along the same lines. Their traditional ally in South Asia is India. That relationship continues to be stable. At the same time, New Delhi is moving closer to the US. So what does Russia do? Seek a counterbalance. This is purely an insurance policy. Take weapons, for instance. America could sanction India if it keeps buying Russian weapons. So Moscow wants a backup option. The problem is Pakistan doesn't have the money. Reason number 2, Pakistan's designs in Central Asia. They're mostly economic. More trade, more raw materials, more energy purchases. Pakistan sees Central Asia as a ticket to their prosperity. Their new national security document mentions this. This is what it says about Russia. Pakistan's geo-economic pivot is focused on enhancing trade and economic ties through connectivity that links Central Asia to our warm waters. Under Vision Central Asia, Pakistan is working towards actualizing agreements on energy and transit with the Central Asian republics. In other words, money. That's what Pakistan wants from Central Asia. Vladimir Putin holds considerable influence in this region. So with his help, Pakistan can strike deals. But what's in it for Moscow? That's reason number 3, the Afghan question. The first Taliban regime was a nightmare for Central Asia. More refugees, more cross-border attacks, more support for extremists in the region. If that happens again, it could be a worry for Putin. So he's hoping that Pakistan can help, that Islamabad's deep state can control the Taliban, basically keep Central Asia safe. So this may seem like a good alliance, but remember we're talking about Pakistan. Their policy is rooted in betrayals and double talk. They've done it to India, they've done it to America, and chances are they will do the same to Russia. Either way, all of this is still conjecture, I have to say this. Such reports of Putin visiting Pakistan are like those rare comets. They pop up every couple of years, but in the end, things never materialize. If you think about it, that also puts Pakistan in an exclusive club. The American president won't call them, the Chinese president won't give them an audience, and the Russian president won't visit them. If this isn't a message of political irrelevance, I don't know what is. As for India, its relationship with Russia is rooted in history, cultural exchanges, military partnerships, and personal chemistry between leaders. Last year, President Putin reaffirmed this relationship. He visited India despite the raging standoff in Ukraine. It's a reassurance for New Delhi, but one that should not be taken for granted. With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks for watching.